So it's like, hey, Michael, we're going to pull these weeds, right? Then it's July in Texas. It's 105 degrees, whatever. It's hot out there. And this kid, he just always has the best attitude. He's like, well, Dad, if you're mad, it's because you're angry. If you're angry, because you're scared. And he's 7, right? What do I have to be scared of? I mean, if I die, I just go to heaven anyways. So they're going to let me scared of, so they're going to let me angry about, they're going to let me mad about. So we'll just pull some weeds or whatever. And I'm telling you, man, I've had a lot of moments where your children teach you so much. We just like, I thought I was a teacher, but that was a moment that really struck me.
Welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. I'm your co-host, Jonathan Brush, along with the one and only co-host, David Rethemeyer, producer, doer of everything else, as we were just talking about with our guest here. And recently, I had just witnessed David as an MC and an absolutely fantastic game show host. So, David, congratulations on your debut at, was it the Rule 4 Gauntlet, which was the
Yes.
somewhat spoof, but also very serious game show that we had at our recent base camp event, where David was bringing the house down as the MC and hosting our game show there. So it was a lot of fun.
It was a lot of fun. I think being on the podcast for so long and, fielding some interesting conversations with guests has prepared me well for fielding a room full of students. So I think this has been a good experience. And so, yeah, I had a lot of fun experience getting to talk with a lot of fun people, including our students. And I think this conversation that we just had is no exception to that.
Well, this is a really fun one. This is another in our E&O series, our Extraordinary to Ordinary series. And I always feel a little funny saying that because James Glenn is pretty extraordinary. It's pretty tough to look at him as an ordinary person. He's only ordinary in the sense that, you may not know him because he's not world famous. And in some ways, that's a shame. But he is a long and dear friend. He is an extraordinary and exceptional person, as you'll find out in the interview. And he has a unique story, but more than that, and I think what almost supersedes the story is he has a unique approach and a unique attitude about life. And he is somebody who I've known is continually challenging himself, and then by virtue of that, challenging everybody in his sphere of influence. And that is a really good thing. So it's a fun conversation, and we look forward to introducing you to our conversation with James. Well, James Glenn, welcome to the Be Unbound podcast. And this is really fun, but you know that it's a circle of some kind because the first podcast I ever tried to record, I recorded in your kid's bedroom with Brian running engineering for us. It's probably
Brian
still
Austin, dude, the man.
Brian Austin running recording engineering for us. It's probably still on a laptop that I've got locked in a safe somewhere. We never published it, but we had a lot of fun. And then we have clearly done at least 6 or 7 episodes worth of podcasts that would be just freaking golden, except for they just happened on the phone and we never hit record because we were just talking. And so James is one of my dearest and closest friends. We are separated geographically now, but we have had just some really awesome experiences and conversations over the years. I know James as an excellent father, now a grandfather, so exceeding me.
Number 4 is on the way, bro.
It's hard to believe. I'm trying to wrap my brain around that.
Just admit it. You're old.
Yes, but not as old as you. So long time's connection to Unbound, definitely a part of our success. James's DNA is woven into our program for sure. We'll talk about this a little bit. What do you say, James? You've done the CrossFit workout, the Murph, 150 times in succession, right? And for those who don't know, we'll talk about that later. Is it 150?
Yeah, I had 3 strings of psychosis in which I just decided to do it every day. But yeah, the longest one was 150 something.
Yeah, I remember that it was something like that.
And I beat all the young kids at the gym last May, by the way.
That does
I
not
was the
surprise
old
me a
guy
bit.
that went to the gym and beat everybody at Murph. It was awesome. All the coaches, everything. It was great.
See, James is one of those highly annoying people that when he was young, he had the ability to back up all the brash talk. And now when he's old, he destroys young guys who have brash talk. And
It's the most fun thing to do.
yeah, the only thing that's ever saved me being around James is I never had enough to back up the brash talk. So I never got started in the first place. So I didn't have to compete. So that was a lot easier. James is primarily a student of people and has done lots of things professionally, a lot of it in sales. And so this is our first attempt at officially recording a conversation. I have no idea where it's going to go. But with that, James, welcome to the podcast. I'm really glad you're here.
Hey, man, welcome. I'm excited. I told my wife, I was like, yeah, I'm on Jonathan's podcast today. She's like, oh, that's awesome. I got to go to the grocery store. I was like, all right, see ya. So like,
You
unfortunately, you're no big deal to her is my point. You know what I
Yeah,
mean?
I'm surprised that wasn't more momentous. I'm really surprised that she wasn't. She's just glad that I didn't show up unannounced and she had to feed me, which is
Hmm. Which,
more
by
the
the way,
history of
you're
the
allowed to do at any time. You know that.
that's more the history I've had with James' wife. She's like, "Oh, you're here again. Are you staying, and do I have to just feed you this time?" So yeah, that
No,
was
come on
in a
in
previous thing.
anytime, bro.
So, well, James, give us a little bit of background because yeah, there's some of the highlights that I can just tell is that in addition to those things we mentioned, you were indeed a D1 athlete and then kind of changed sports in the middle of that, have gone on to do lots of different things professionally. And I would say still one of the most competitive athletes that I know on several different arenas. So, if you're going to summarize your wild and woolly history for us in a couple of minutes, what would it look like?
So I am a wannabe David Goggins. Let's just go there. No. Hey,
He's David Goggins with cleaner language and a healthier life. Is kind of what for a healthier personal life. Yeah.
no, I love him, by the way. No, no. So basically, my whole life was soccer. That was what I was going to do, who I was going to be. And then I was injured, and that career ended for a lot of different reasons. And then I was a very competitive, of all things, water skier. How crazy is that? And then was a triathlete about 8, 9 years. And then in the midst, married, having children, all that kind of stuff. But as far as the athletic track goes, and then found CrossFit through some military friends of mine and got involved in that. And I'm getting back involved in that right now. But in the interim, like you mentioned, yeah, I just got involved in a lot of that stuff. I've done my last big thing, I guess, would be June of last year. A buddy of mine that I played soccer with was like, "Hey, I think I want to run a 50, but no one will do it with me." And I was dumb enough in like what, March or April of last year to say, "I'll do it with you." And so I ended up in Michigan running 50 miles with this guy through the streets of Grand Rapids just to do it. Like it wasn't even an event, but we just did
Did
it
you
together.
did you
And
train for it?
6 weeks. Yeah, like
Okay.
six
Yeah.
weeks I purposely trained for that. But that was awesome. And so much of my athletic life was, you know, I don't want to say doing it for glory, but when you look back on it, that's kind of what you were doing. And so to do this where it was just for him, like I was literally his, like I helped him through it. It was a great experience. So there you go. Athletic stuff, whatever. I've done, adventure races and ultras and blah, 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 blah. Now the business side, I had planned to be a pastor. My wife married a pastor at the altar, by the way, who became a mortgage guy. Which she's like, that's not fair.
She got
Um,
more than she bargained for in so many ways.
yeah,
So, yeah.
probably not what she was looking for. But that led into a bunch of like sales training, consulting with gyms, believe it or not, chiropractors, which I thought were quacks for years, but I still help them out. Now I believe that a good one's like a good mechanic. So yeah, so a lot of that, and that you mentioned earlier when you were talking before this, yeah. So now I met this guy that owns another company. I've worked with 2 or 3 outdoor construction companies now. I love what these guys are doing, and I'm just trying to help them out. So I don't know if that's what you're going
Yeah.
for, but I'm trying to compress. You know me, I can go. You and I can stand on stage and talk for a while. So I'm trying to compress.
Yeah, long form podcasts all the rage these days, so we'll be in good
There you
shape.
go. There you go.
So we mentioned the Murph, and so for those who don't know, explain what that is.
Oh, well, if you're not familiar with CrossFit, I'll just boil it down really quick. So CrossFit, the fastest, largest growing fitness program on the planet. Greg Glassman started it. It really was born in the first responders, military, special forces community because it was about functional fitness. And so what happened is they started naming workouts called hero workouts. So a hero would die in service, and then they would say, well, what was his favorite workout? And then that would be a workout that the community would do as a group. So Michael Murphy, which is, if you've seen the movie or read the book, Lone Survivor, the Marcus Luttrell story. So Michael Murphy was the commander of the SEAL team on that mountain when they all died and all that stuff. And Michael Murphy's favorite workout was, and the workout in the CrossFit community is called Murph. It's by far the most famous hero workout. Every CrossFitter on the planet does it on Memorial Day. And it's a 1 mile run, 100 pull-ups, 200 push-ups, 300 squats, and another mile run, all wearing a 20-pound weight vest. Or for them, that was their body armor. So that's the workout. So I just fell in love with the workout because it's funny when you're doing a hero workout, you don't really think about yourself, because you're thinking about the person you're doing the workout in remembrance of. And yeah, so I just went bananas like 2017. I don't know why. And I was like, I just did the workout. And then I was like, I wonder if I could do it tomorrow. I was like, I wonder if I could do it the next day. And then the next thing you know is like 30 some days in a row. And then a couple years later, COVID hits and all the gyms are closed and I'm going bananas again. So I'm like, hey, I'll do that. And yeah, that turned into like 150 in a row. And that was nuts. And that made me tough as nails, by the way. So great workout if you're looking to get fit.
Well, and I think the context for this is that most people do it once a year, Memorial Day, and it's a milestone, and it's also something to be built up to and to recover from. So it's not really considered to be a daily workout. So 30 times in a row, 50 times in a row, 7 times in a row, all fairly remarkable. 150 is probably on the other side of mental illness, David Goggins style.
True
Um,
story.
but but yeah,
My
but
wife would
also,
attest to that.
well, I think I remember you telling me that was it the Murph called the workout bulletproof? Murphy called the workout
Yeah, yeah.
bulletproof.
Because obviously he didn't name it after himself, right?
Right.
Yeah. Oh, that's so terrible you're saying that because no, it's not. It's not body armor.
Oh, okay.
Body armor. That's what he called the workout himself. And he would get the other SEALs to do it with him, like, hey, do this workout with me. You know what I mean? And to be fair, I didn't do it in in the way because when he would do it, it was a kind of one-off thing. And
Right.
it was like, do it as fast as you can. When you commit to doing it every day, you kind of change that up, right? Like I would do a lot of strict pull-ups and then some kipping, and I would like maybe not run as hard as I could. You know what I'm saying? But it was kind of cool to build the resiliency to just wake up and be like, ah, this is what I'm doing this morning. And that was just it. And then have a cup of coffee. That was it. So it's amazing how when you just work your body, you don't need a gym. I had a pull-up bar in my garage I built, weight vest that I bought. And yeah, you get really resilient, man. So I don't know.
How long did it take you to do it typically, James?
Well, again, like I said, I did it in different ways. When I did it just this last Memorial Day at the CrossFit gym, I did it in 44 minutes, but it was like super hot out. That's pretty fast. Like, I mean, I was faster than most people there. But the cool thing is that when I had started doing it like months prior, so I had gotten out of shape. I was overweight. So I step on the scale and with the weight vest on, I won't say my weight, but I was heavy, right? So what I did is my weight vest takes 40 pounds. So what I did is as I dropped weight, I added weight to the vest so that I stayed at that weight.
Stayed the same weight?
So that by the time I went to the workout, that 20 pounds felt like a Kleenex, dude. It was awesome. So you're letting me brag. I kind of don't like that, but anyways,
Well,
it
it was
was an amazing experience.
it
And I
worked.
think it's a testimony to just go. Just, you know what I mean? There was times, dude, where it would be 10:30 at night and I'm coming home and I'm running around like, oh my gosh, I didn't work out today. And I would have to just go out in the garage, throw the weight vest down and just go. So on average, an hour,
Yeah.
hour 15 if I went slow, but just do it. And it was way more a mental improvement than physical by far.
Well, that was actually gonna be my next question. So, I mean, I think if you hear this and you just hear those stats, you go, "Well, obviously, I bet you the guy got ripped." And so I think that's the case. But I remember talking to you several times through that period, when you did initially, and then, not so much in the follow-ups, and then I think I talked to you in the middle of your longest streak or towards the end of it. And I always was struck by I felt like you were saying and sounding like you were getting a lot more mental gains from it than physical. And so maybe just speak to that a little bit about what that did. Like what was it like to make sure that streak was unbroken and then have to do that no matter what was going on? Because I mean, you live in a world with a bunch of kids and a bunch of different responsibilities and often significant professional responsibilities. So no day looks the same. And yet you've got this one fairly significant thing that just never varied for 30 days, 50 days, then 150 days. So
Dude, that is such a fantastic question. I don't even know if I can answer it, but the first thing that came to my mind was that, there's the physical, emotional, mental, spiritual like element of yourself. And there's something interesting about the connection between the physical and the spiritual, right? Because your brain can think what it wants and I don't want to do this. And you can feel like, "Ugh, yeah, whatever. But there's something, there's some connection that happens. And I'm going to get, sorry if this is bad for your podcast, but like esoterical, like I believe that God created matter because matter matters, you know, like there's something to the physical, man, the mitochondria, like oxygen, everything, there's something to it. And when you apply a spiritual discipline to the physical, all of a sudden you get this connection, right? So I don't even know if I'm answering your question, but what I can tell you is that my humility grew the more days I did it because I realized that, like, wow, like, I'm telling myself I'm going to do this, I'm going to do it. I'm a tough guy, whatever. Not even close, man. It made me realize that much more, like how grand the grand is, right? Like, whoa, I'm just this little ant, freaking, hanging up, bar, like doing push-ups or whatever. Like, that's ridiculous. This is silly, but the biggest growth, and yes, I had physical growth for sure, no doubt, like my physicality improved and was good, but it was more the understanding that, you know, wow, like there is a whole force out there that's way bigger and better than me. And I'm just kind of lining up with it for like an hour and a half or an hour. You know what I mean? So I apologize if that's not the best answer, but that's what came to mind when you said that.
No, actually, believe it or not, it was the answer I was going for because I don't know if you remember this conversation. We had a conversation a long time ago, I think in a restaurant in Texas, but I'm not positive about that. And in it, you were recounting how you and a friend at one point had gone on a no sugar diet for some level of time. And that
That
several
was when
weeks,
keto, no one knew what
yeah,
keto was, bro.
right.
When I
That
was first racing triathlon in the early 2000s, keto wasn't even a word. But for those of us in that community, like serious racers, we knew all about that. Yes, that was Brad and myself. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. You and Brad talked about. Well, interestingly, when you told me the story, keto wasn't a buzzword, right? So that was I'd never heard of that before because it wasn't really a thing in the fitness community as being discussed a lot. And I was intrigued by that. But what I was really intrigued by was that your experience spiritually at that time. And I think you made a comment something like, this might be as close as it's possible to get in a fallen world now marred by sin to maybe what some of the ideal would have been in Eden. And then I think your statement was there's something about the makeup of your body that makes it easier to connect spiritually to God. And that really struck me and kind of come full circle here, James. A year or so ago, I guess last year, we had an event and Andrew Pudawa was the speaker there.
Oh,
And Andrew's really
I
gotten
know Andrew.
into, yeah, well, you don't know this, Andrew, because Andrew recently has really gotten into physical fitness and those kinds of things. And he was saying some things. And I was like, man, I remember talking to James about that several years ago. And we had very interesting discussions, including with students there, about the connection between preparing to fight spiritual battles. And the only way to really practically train for that was to fight physical battles. Now, not to actually go out and punch somebody in the head, but to fight physical battles, meaning to discipline the body. And so I thought it was interesting. To me, it was a throwback to that conversation. So I don't know if you remember that conversation or pick up that thread, but I was struck by I think you've had a pretty consistent linkage between physical fitness, not so much health, but physical effort and spiritual practice or spiritual maturity, if that makes sense.
No, man, you're helping me reminisce the conversation I have. So I've trained several people over the years. It's kind of like a hobby of mine, whatever. I have a young girl right now in Arizona who's killing it. She's going to be a professional softball player, which I never thought I'd be training a girl softball player. But anyways, so this young man, Jake, who I trained years ago, who might actually be a good person for you to interview. He's a really interesting kid. I knew him since like fifth grade. And then, I moved away, came back, whatever. I ended up training him physically. When I started with him, he was 155 pounds. When I was done, 16 months later, he was 190 pounds and just fit. Right. So he went from someone who was like a fifth of where I was to like competing with me. And I remember we walked into a CrossFit gym one day together, like, hey, let's do the workout, whatever. And we just kept upping the ante to each other, right? Like that's what buddies do. Like, oh, it's 45 pounds. Let's make it 65. Oh, it's a 24-inch box. Let's make it 32. Like we just kept, we were just playing with each other just for fun, knowing we were about to suffer together, right? So then we go through the workout and we talked about it like a couple days later. And the thing we came to, and I don't want to try and unpack the whole thing, but basically is that when you think of um not familiar, that's the wrong word, but purposeful suffering and choosing to suffer. First of all, for the human mind, there's something that's good about that. There's something that's good about choosing to suffer. But then when you try and take it a step further, which we can't do because we're not the divine, when you try and relate to Christ and you try and relate to, from the garden, what we understand, through the beating and to the crucifixion, and then, oh my God, why have you forsaken me? And it's like, for me personally, like there is a connection that I feel, you know, to my big bro. Okay. Jesus. Like there is literally a connection. I feel like, man, there's no way I'm ever going to suffer as much as you did. Like this is just some stupid workout, whatever. But it's that willful choice of pushing into suffering that creates so much enlightenment, growth, maturity, discipline, all the stuff you want to talk about. Goggins, he's about discipline, which is cool, but it just doesn't get spiritual to me. So it's kind of shallow. So no offense, but I'm just saying, like when Jake and I were talking, because he's a fellow Christian as well, we talk about that. And it's just like, man, like there's just something to that there's just growth in there. And I would never write a book about it because I don't know if I could ever extrapolate it, but I just know that in those moments, and there's a bunch of them, when it's like, quit, stop, dumb, no one's supporting you, right? But you just do it anyway, man. So for these young people, trying to bring it back, that are scared of failure, that are scared of, not being whatever, dude, just throw that out the window. You are, Jonathan, you and I have so many conversations like this over the years. Like these young people don't understand how well prepared they are for the chaos that's coming. They're so prepared. They don't even know it. And it's like, hey man, maybe do a push-up. I don't know what Pepper's going to do to kind of build your resiliency. But like that is the one characteristic that I do see in this community. Cause my kids are part of it too. My children, is that there's a softness. Like there's this softness, like, no, do not be soft, be hard, be strong, and realize that no one's going to care anyways. And guess what? In 200 years, no one's going to even know your name. No one's going to care what you said. No one's going to care what you did. So stick up for and be who you're supposed to be, and just do that. And then let all the chips fall where they may. So sorry, man, you let me on a soapbox. You know how I am.
Well, I think that's the point. I mean, like the cool thing is, like you can say that's what the mission is now. You get podcasting, you can put people on soapboxes, and David's just happy that it's not me on the soapbox because he got plenty of that last week at base camp, and so he's happy not to have the other person on the mic now. Well, when we started, James, before we started recording, you were talking about your youngest, Michael, and a little incident that he had pulling weeds out in the Texas sun, and kind of his perspective on that. So recount that a little bit because I want to kind of pick up that theme and talk about it a little bit more. But tell that story like you just told David and I here shortly before.
Oh yeah, we were just chatting and just, but I like to make my children do hard things. What was the book, Jonathan? Remember the two homeschool kids?
Yeah, it was Do Hard Things. Yeah.
Was that like the 90s?
Alex and Brett
Jones
Harris,
or Johnson or
Harris?
Harris.
Yeah.
Anyways, man, that message just sticks right now, doesn't it? Anyways,
Yeah.
so I like to have my children experience things because I feel you learn much more through experience than you do from me telling you, right? So it's like, hey, Michael, hey, we're going to pull these weeds, right? And it's July in Texas. It's 105 degrees, whatever. It's hot out there. And this kid, he just always has the best attitude, and I love it. And so he's out there pulling weeds, and I wish I could remember the details better, but the bottom line is that I was like, man, you just have like a great attitude. You're not mad. He's like, well, Dad, you know, if you're mad, it's because you're angry. If you're angry, it's because you're scared. And he's 7, right? And I'm just like, okay, that sounds pretty good. And he goes, what do I have to be scared of? I mean, if I die, I just go to heaven anyways. So I got nothing to be scared of. So I got nothing to be scared of. So I got nothing to be angry about. I got nothing to be mad about. So we'll just post some weeds or whatever. And I'm telling you, man, like, he's my 7th child. So I've had a lot of moments, as you know, Jonathan, where your children teach you so much. Where you're just like,
Yeah.
whoa, I thought I was the teacher, but that was a moment that really struck me. And I feel like, out of the mouths of babes, man, it was just true.
Well, I mean, you say out of the mouths of babes. At some point, I mean, that's a repeat of lessons he clearly learned, and so I, I think that one of the things that I've been struck with as we've gone through the years is that James, you've always struck me as a student of people, but then somebody who is able to see through the current circumstances to a deeper truth and to see and sometimes in ways I'll recount a quick
They
story.
get me fired.
No, no, not fired this time, but I was at James' house one time, and we had several people there, and I won't recount all the details because it would be a little hard to kind of set the exact thing. But James dropped a very controversial, very sort of in your face statement that just shut down the entire conversation. And they looked at me and says, "Well, I'm out." And then he just went upstairs and he did something upstairs. He just left me with a bunch of these people just kind of sitting there with their eyes wide open. And I'm like, well, I think what James was trying to say was, but in the next 5 minutes, those people opened up and talked about things that they'd never talked about before. James came down about 5 minutes after that, so after a 10-minute gap. And for the next 3 hours, there were a bunch of people in James's kitchen and living room who had a really, really deep conversation that got opened up because of a perceptive question, and then B, a willingness to say something that most people wouldn't, that kind of shocked people out of their comfort zone, and in the process created a real atmosphere for some deeper
And
conversations.
I think I know the one you're talking about. You know that girl went on to have a fantastic life
Yeah.
and career and change her life. You know that, right?
Yes. No, I do.
Okay.
That is the conversation. So anyhow, I was trying to figure out a way to sort of capture that attitude. Like, how did you get to that point? Because I think you only get to that point if you're somebody who has had enough experience to see both the highs of having completed 150 MRFs, but also the lows of, I don't know, starting a streak and not finishing, or just the lows of going, I gotta do this again and I don't really feel like it. So I don't know if you can kind of, what is it that kind of got you to the point where you were able to see and think in that direction?
So I know. So you and I have known each other for what, man, 13 years now?
Yeah, it's actually
2011,
yeah, it's coming on. So
2011,
yeah.
2010, something like that. It's funny because when you ask a question like that, you and I are old enough that we've done probably more reflecting than we should. So I'm going to go further back than that. So I honestly, to answer your question, and by the way, that's an awesome question. And it makes me feel good to hear you ask that question. But it, when I was young, and again, we're all cooked in the oven at some point, right? And then you come out and then you figure it out, right? And so when I was cooked, who cares about all the other circumstances? But I hated bullies and I hated liars, man. I hated it. And so I think a lot of time lying and bullying goes hand in hand. All the fights I got in up till 15, 16, whatever, like, fights that you can't really get hurt in, right?
Yeah.
Once you hit like 20, you can really get hurt. But, you know, I was never fighting for myself. It was always because somebody was bullying somebody else, and I just was nuts. And I wasn't a big, strong guy. I was little, man. Like when I started my junior high school, I was 5'1", 105 pounds. I was a little person, but I didn't care. Like if I saw somebody getting bullied, and so I think there's a conscientiousness, you know, wherever that comes from. I mean, I can think back to, multiple deaths that happened in my life when I was younger that kind of made me really think about bigger picture stuff. And I learned to just have this despite for anything that wasn't 100% true. and I didn't care about standing up to a bully. So I think as I became an adult, the idea of speaking truth into a situation that made people uncomfortable. There's a song by, oh geez, there's an awesome band. I can't believe it. Hard Love, Brother, Need to Breathe. Anyways, and they've got a song called Hard Love. And you can interpret that song in a bunch of different ways. But I was influenced by men in my life because I was searching for a father figure in my life. And I was influenced by three specific men, and they all distributed hard love to me, which meant that they spoke truth regardless of how it made me feel. So I think that as I then became a young parent and, moved into the adult world, when I saw BS, I was like, yeah, someone's got to say something to that. And you know what? I'll be the one. I don't care. Like, this is before you could get canceled. I would have been canceled 1,000 times if that was a thing. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I mean, I think that's where it comes from. And, I just felt a deep love from God through Christ in my teenage years, and realized that, this walk is so short. This time is so short. Like, well, I don't, who cares about what people think about me? Like, I'm just going to speak truth into this. And you know what? If I'm wrong, it'll bounce back and I'll figure it out, but I'm going to speak into it. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think that's when I look back at my upbringing, I think those tough situations made me kind of decide, you know what? Yeah, I'm just going to say whatever, do whatever, and let the chips fall where they may.
Well, I think
Well,
that the statement right before, oh, go ahead, David. You're going to say something.
yeah. So, James, I really just haven't known you very well at all up until this call. And so, just something that I've observed from your answers so far is that pretty much throughout like any sort of challenging circumstances that you've had, even through extreme workouts and such, like I know that a lot of guys that I know like do that kind of thing just like to be able to prove themselves or to be able to like have some sort of like other motivation. But it seems like, especially with what you just said, a lot of how you're able to look at those challenges and hard situations is with more of like that eternal perspective of the fact that like, hey, our time here on earth is limited. And so let's just, use what God has given us to the fullest extent. So I was just curious if that's what I'm hearing from you, if that's an accurate assessment, if you can speak into that a bit.
No, awesome, bro. Thank you so much for that feedback. And, if I'm going to be 100% honest, I think I've said this to Jake and Brad. Like, I don't know if I've ever talked to anybody about this ever. It's really, so I believe through critical thinking, logic, reason, creator, Jesus, atonement, sacrifice, life, death, heaven, hell. Okay. I believe that. Like, I've come to that conclusion. It's so funny. Jake and I had this conversation once, and Brad and I, because we race triathlon together, and you do all this stupid stuff. And it's like, there's a little bit of like, you're kind of chasing the suffering that Jesus went through, because there's no way you're going to ever suffer that much. But if you can willfully take the next step, do the next rep, do the next pull up, whatever, and willfully suffer. And again, it's not suffering like, "Oh, I'm dying," but it's just kind of like, no, I'm being disciplined in following the will I set for myself, right? There's a connection that you feel, you know? So yeah, I could probably word that way better. I've never had somebody ask me that question before, so sorry. But no, there is it is not at all like my daughter, who's like on social media. Oh my gosh, Dad, you need to post all this. I'm like, "Ugh." Like, it was disgusting. That'd be like posting my prayer time. You know what I mean? Like, I'm not going to post that. She's like, "Oh, people would think that's so cool." I'm like, and I guess I'm doing it now, but whatever. Yeah, I apologize. I'm not answering your question directly, but it's in the deepest moments, whether it's like waking up, you're like, "Oh my," or it's like, rep 98 of whatever. And you're just like, there's a connection that happens, and for me personally, I guess there is kind of like a spiritual element. I mean, like the music I listen to, my son came in when I was doing Murph once, and I had like, Psalms playing, the Bible on audio in my garage, like, "Dad, you're such a nerd. You're working out the Psalms. I'm like, hey man, this is God's voice. This is my power, bro. So call me crazy.
No, I don't think it's crazy at all. I think it's just like really cool how different people have like a different way that God has wired them to have a connection with them. And it sounds like it's a very, very direct thing for you to connect with God through pushing yourself physically. And I think that's really cool.
Matter matters.
Well, that would be a theme for this. I think the other one is there's a connection between your story of your son pulling the weeds and Michael's kind of direct connection to like sort of the bottom line. And something you said in that when I answering my question, which is Michael picked up from living under your influence that, why am I worried about picking weeds in 15-degree weather? If, what's the worst that can happen? I could die. Okay, already you've got kind of an extreme push there. People like, no, you get hot and miserable. He's like, no, I die and no problem. And I'll just go with Jesus. And then James, you said something very interesting a minute ago. You said, I'm just going to speak truth. And if it's wrong, it'll bounce off and I'll learn from it and go forward. I think that's one of the things that makes you an interesting person to me and probably to a lot of people, which is a absolutely upfront brashness that is there that would be completely insufferable if it weren't completely tempered with a streak of humility and that reality. And I think that that's a very unusual combination. And it's one that we've discussed several times and I've certainly witnessed several times, which is, I will absolutely kick your butt at doing the Murph, but I will take no joy in that because the only reason it would be interesting to me is if I could then share with you what I've learned through the process. And it is like both of those all at once, which is very interesting. You get a lot of people who are very brash and you get a lot of people who are very humble, but you very rarely get somebody who has those things twisted together like Damascus steel. And I think that's a fascinating combination. And I think Michael's story is a pretty interesting kind of reflection of that from your fathering. And then your statement about, James will say a lot of things. He's not worried about it because he truly believes that if it's correct, it will land. And if not, God will correct him. No big deal. Pick up and move forward. And that attitude and approach to failure is kind of the spiritual heart of resilience in a way that is a little harder to get to that I don't think people see as well. So I appreciated that over the years and appreciated sort of getting that reflected in this conversation. So thanks for sharing both sides of that.
Tell you what, man, like, wow, your words, like this guy, David, I mean, this guy's words are
Yeah,
like
I know.
honey. What's the name of your podcast? It should be like honey dripping from Jonathan's lips or something.
Oh yeah,
Like, he's
that'll
so
definitely
good.
I'm
position.
gonna have to veto that one real quick. Just
Well, no, because you're around him in private. But I'm just saying, like, you know, that was so good. And I guess Jonathan, that you said something, and I have this picture in my brain is like, so to me, like Jesus is like the 10-foot tall, 500-pound Mr. Olympia. Okay. You know what I'm saying? As far as when it comes to willpower and discipline, right? So to just brush up against that a little bit in my own experience and like what David was talking about, like, yeah, I do think that I do brush up to that. Now, I don't think everyone has to do that. And, some people are more physically or kinetically wired. Some people are more audio, visual, whatever. You know what I mean? I get it. But it's like, yeah, it's, I love the way you just framed that right there. It made me feel so good about myself. But it's like, the number one thing I have the hardest time with is that uh, I, I can't, the second I say this, I can't say it. Okay. So the second I say it, it's over. But like, I really feel like I'm a humble person. I mean, like
And
you
I'm
can't say
good at
that.
it.
Like, it's like, oh, look at my award for humility. You know what I mean? Like you can't do that, but I think that's, if if I've been misunderstood in my life at all, like, dude, in multiple ministries I've been in part of where felt like I was on a part of a team and we're all pushing the same direction. And are we, the Great Commission and let's, come on, let's do this, And then the next thing I know, and College Plus was an example or whatever you want to call it when it ended, was an example of that it's like, wait, we're not on the same team. Like I thought we were all doing the same thing here. You know what I mean? And Jonathan would call me after meetings, be like, dude, what did you just say to so-and-so? I'm like, what? Like I did. It, isn't that true? He's like, well, yeah, maybe.
It is
but
true.
So, I don't know, man. That's my kryptonite, you know. It's just like, I don't know. I'm just gonna throw it out there, and if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. But thank you so much for your characterization. That was so positive.
Well, thank you for your time. I appreciate you coming on here. It's fun to record one of our conversations instead of finishing. We've had a lot of conversations. Often
Oh
I'm
my
walking
gosh,
around
dude.
the
I
field.
thought about that.
So,
I actually looked back on my phone. Dude, you're talking like 40 hours of conversations. You know?
I haven't put in 150 MRFs, but I put in a lot of miles around the field, and a lot of those end with, "It's too bad we hadn't recorded this. We could have sold it as a course." So, yeah.
No, exactly. Well, by the way, one thing I will say is that because of this context, David, this is the least Jonathan has talked in our conversation because so, so now I have to get a podcast and bring you on
Yeah,
so you
reverse
can
it.
talk the whole time.
Well, thanks for coming on and talking.
Thanks,
Appreciate
brother.
it. Chris Chen, if you're listening to this, and for those of you who listen to our interview there, I can predict what Chris is going to say 3 sentences before he does because of James. And James, the reverse is true. Having spent a little more time with Chris recently, I can predict some of the stuff coming out of your mouth 3 sentences before you say it. So I've got to get the two of you together sometime. And for the listeners who have listened to both, you might find some parallels in those 2 interviews. If not, it's a good excuse to go back and look at the catalog.
Love it.
James, thanks so much, and blessings on all you do. And I'll look forward to our next 4-hour conversation. Well, that was what we expected to be, which was an interesting conversation. So, David, you had a unique experience because I don't believe you've met James before. So, tell me about your experience with Mr. Glenn.
No, I had not. This was a brand new experience for me. Like I knew him by name and somewhat by reputation. I'd heard a couple of stories, and I think he lived up to it since they were mostly stories from you. But yeah, I will say, for one thing, with his physical accomplishments, just the fact that he casually dropped that he did a 50-mile race just on 6 weeks of training. Like, I just did a half marathon a few weeks ago, and I trained for that for like 2 or 3 months, and I still was like the hardest thing I'd ever physically done. And so the fact that he's in good enough shape at double my age to be able to do that is just insane to me. And so there's just a lot to be said about his physical accomplishments, but also just, yeah, I think his perspective and his attitude, as we kind of concluded there with how he approaches things, I'll go ahead and say it for him. I do think that he is genuinely a humble person, and just like the way that he communicates is just so direct that it's not something that you catch at first unless you're really paying attention for it. But I think that he does have a good understanding of just how big God is and how small he is in and of himself, but the fact that he gets to be a part of what God has made. And I think that's really cool.
James is in many ways a larger than life figure in terms of his physical fitness, his abilities, the challenges he takes on, the experiences he has and life experience that he has. And so that can be what you see immediately. Also, James is one of the most others focused people I know, which is a strange combination. So he has this real magnetism and presence in a room, and yet almost everything he does is at some level aimed at helping, understanding, or focusing on somebody else. And that's just a very interesting combination, and it makes him a fascinating person to talk to, a fascinating person to be around, but also somebody that is a lot of fun to learn from. And I've certainly benefited from, we talk a lot about, at the heart of knowledge is discovering principles, things that are true no matter what, and being able to gain perspective on them, another way of looking at them in a way that you can then apply them in your life. And James is a walking perspective machine who really just kind of throws out constant new ways to see things and consider things. And that makes it a lot of fun. And yeah, having him on the podcast was really fun because, like I said, it was full circle. The first podcast ever attempted, which never got published, I did with James. And we had a fun conversation at the time. And in some ways, it was just a completing a circle to bring him on the podcast here.
That would be fascinating if we were able to find that at some point. I don't know if we'd actually want to put it out there for the internet, but just for us to look back on would be fascinating.
Yeah, there's probably a reason we didn't publish it, but I'm sure it's on a laptop sitting in a safe in my house somewhere. So yeah, I just even thinking back at what that is probably makes me grin and cringe at the same time. So. Well, I hope that you've enjoyed our time with James. One last thing to mention about James, and by extension, a lot of people who we haven't necessarily had in the podcast, but I mentioned that James's DNA was woven into Unbound, and it is worth noting that Unbound stands on the shoulders of giants. David didn't found it. I didn't found it. We inherited it from other folks. We've had a chance to do something slightly different with it, but we were only able to do that because we built it on the shoulders of giants. James was one of those. And in many ways, it would be not untrue at all to say that we wouldn't be here if it had been for the blood, sweat, and tears he put in an earlier time that ended up continuing on to this. And there's many others besides James that'd be the case of. And so talking to James brought back some of those memories and reflections. A lot of the time I referred to being in Texas was working with that group of people. And so if any of you are out there listening, please know that we think of you every day and recognize that all that we get to do today has a lot to do with what you did then. And if you're listening new, just know that we want to make it really clear that almost everything we get to do today is because of others' work and sacrifice and things that they did before. And so we're deeply appreciative of that. As you know, at the end of the podcast, we generally talk a little bit about what's going on in Unbound. And David, we can say that we had a really fun last week. We're still probably a little sleep deprived from it. If you define fun as over 100 young people in one extremely large beach house for a week down in Alabama, we had an absolutely fantastic time and real blast at base camp. So anything else you want to add about base camp, David?
Oh, man. I think just the variety of people that we got to hear from there was super cool. It's something that we've talked about a lot as staff is that, you hear a lot from Jonathan and myself on the podcast, but when you're at events, there is just such a huge variety of speakers that all have such a unique perspective on different things. And in particular, we talked a lot about some of the things that we talked about on this episode, which is learning from failure and how to look for hope on the other side of hard and challenging situations. And so just hearing from so many different people with so many different backgrounds and challenges that they've been through, but all of them having that same theme woven through it was just such a cool thing to be a part of. I absolutely love getting to hear from all the unique things every single time we do one of these.
Well, this is such a unique event in so many ways. We had some excellent outside speakers that came in, and Stuart McAllister was one of them. You heard from him on this podcast already.
Mm-hmm.
Some of those other outside speakers we'll have on our podcast coming up. We'll be looking forward to introducing you to them directly. But this was unique because we had such a variety of our own folks on stage, both from our staff. And so we had excellent sessions from Victoria, from Tim, from Trent. David, of course, is on stage quite a bit for the entertainment parts. And so it was really fun to have those there. But we also had some alumni who came back and spoke. Melissa Weber, Sarah Shaw, who's been on the podcast before, John Skomsky, who we look forward to having on the podcast in the future. Those are folks who came through Unbound at various times, have gone on to become absolute experts in their fields. In Melissa's case, in multiple fields, and well, I guess in all their cases in multiple fields, if I think about that. And we're now coming back to speak to our students from that experience. And one of our staff members said was just such a privilege to sit and listen to people who put such time and expertise into their subjects and then be able to come back and share that with us. And it was really fun to see so many of our own family members, so to speak, having come through Unbound, gone on to do some really exciting and fun things, and then come back and share with our community in ways that had all of us sitting down taking notes and saying, oh, yeah, we can learn from that. So Unbound really is that kind of family community feel. And so if you're interested in the things that we do here, go to beunbound.us. Definitely check out Ascend, which is the program that Basecamp is included with. Although if you're interested in high school programs, you can look at that as well. We had quite a few high school students at our Basecamp event this year, first time ever. They acquitted themselves quite well. We had a lovely time with especially the folks in our Explore program who came, and it was super fun to have them involved in all the activities at Basecamp. But check out our YouTube channel. Soon we'll be having some wrap-up videos from this base camp, as well as you can look back to previous ones, including some shots of that great big beach house, as in some, probably our last two base camp wrap-up videos have at least a reference to some shots of that house. And if you want to learn more about how we do live events, weave that together with project-based education, and ultimately do that in such a way that trains and equips students to thrive. That's what we do at Unbound. That's what we hope to do and help to do in this podcast. That's what we'd like to profile extraordinary people who you ordinarily might not have heard about, like James Glenn. So thank you so much for your time. And until next time, be unbound.